The Mystery of the Shrinking House, Chapter 2, Jupiter is Right and Wrong. Professor Carswell raced across the lawn of the big house toward the small cottage, with Uncle Titus and Pete close behind him, and the overweight Jupiter puffing in the rear. Breathlessly they ran under the patched porch awning of the cottage and burst into a small living room. The room was sparsely furnished and empty. "Harold!" Professor Carswell called out in alarm. "Dad!" a voice cried. "Help!" The voice from the tiny bedroom of the cottage. Pete and Uncle Titus followed the professor into it. They saw a narrow cot, a chair, and a large bureau that had been knocked over. A thin boy lay on the floor half under the bureau. Professor Carswell hurried to him. "I'm okay, Dad," the boy said. "I just can't get out." Together, Professor Carswell, Pete, and Uncle Titus heaved the heavy bureau off Hal Carswell. The boy stood up and brushed himself off. "I heard a noise in here, Dad," Hal explained, "so I came in to look. There was someone all in black and masked. When I yelled, he pushed the bureau over on me and ran out the back way." "Jupe was right," Pete exclaimed. "He did see a man in black, but the man must have been coming out of your house, not going in." Pete looked all around the bedroom and out in the small living room. Jupiter was nowhere in the cottage. "Jupiter Jones!" Uncle Titus called out. "Gosh," Pete gulped. "He was right behind us when we ran out of the house. Where could he be?" Professor Carswell turned to his son. "You say that would-be burglar ran out back? Did he have a weapon, Hal?" "I didn't see any." Once again they all froze as a cry broke the twilight outside the garage. "Arg!" Professor Carswell whirled. That sounds as if it came from the barranca in back. Maybe someone fell in. "Is it a deep barranca?" Uncle Titus asked nervously. "No, but deep enough to injure someone," Professor Carswell said. "Follow me." The tall professor quickly led them behind the cottage, where they crashed through the thick chaparral and live oaks in the lengthening shadows. Lengthening shadows of the outlying canyon. They stopped abruptly at the edge of a narrow, steep-sided gully about 10 feet deep. It ran across the canyon, curving away out of sight in both directions. Its bottom was strewn with heavy rocks and eroded trees. There was no sign of Jupiter or anyone else. "Look!" Pete said. A dark stain was on some rocks below and to the right. The four of them scrambled down the steep sides to stand over the darkened rocks. Pete touched the stain. It was wet. "Blood," the second investigator said, and gulped. When Pete and the others had rushed into the cottage earlier, Jupiter had been far behind. He saw the black-garbed figure running from behind the cottage toward the heavy chaparral at the rear of the property. The stocky first investigator realized that no one else had seen the fleeing intruder. The man was sure to escape if Jupiter took the time to warn the others in the cottage. He hesitated for only a second, then turned and pursued the running figure. Jupiter was unable to get a good look at the man before he vanished into the heavy brush and dusty oaks. Panting, the stout first investigator reached the tall underbrush just as he heard the cry ahead. There was a crashing, the sound of something sliding and falling, and then a loud thud and groaning cry. Jupiter slipped through the dense chaparral to the edge of the narrow barranca. In the shadowed gloom at the bottom of the steep little gully, the black figure staggered up and limped off along the barranca to the right. The man was dragging his left leg. Jupiter slid down, and at the bottom of the barranca he found blood on some rocks. A trail of blood led off to the right. Jupiter followed the trail cautiously. The gully was the perfect place for an ambush if the intruder knew he was being followed. A car door slammed up ahead and the car motor started. Jupiter began to run. A little way ahead, the barranca came out into the main canyon road, which looped back along the side of the Carswell property before turning in the direction of Rocky Beach. By the time Jupiter reached the road, the taillights of the car were vanishing towards town. Pete was still staring at the blood on the rocks at the bottom of the barranca when he heard someone coming. Uncle Titus heard it too. "Down, Peter," he said. "Everyone." They all crouched in the shadows of the barranca, ready to leap on the intruder. Jupiter came around the curve in the gully. "Jupe!" Pete cried. "What happened?" "I chased the intruder," Jupiter said, "but I lost him." "Jupiter Jones!" Uncle Titus exploded. "You should know better than try to capture a thief by yourself." "I didn't try to capture him, Uncle Titus. I just followed to try to see his face, but it was dark and he had a car." Professor Carswell shook his head. "I can't understand what he wanted here. All I can imagine is that he made a mistake. There are wealthy people in these big canyon houses, and he must have simply picked the wrong house. Well, whatever. Perhaps we should get back to business, Mr. Jones." They all went back to the cottage. Professor Carswell switched on lights and took 2 old leather suitcases from the bedroom closet. In one were clothes, an old-fashioned dress suit, a gray flannel suit, and several shirts, ties, and pairs of socks. In the other were some paints, a stuffed owl, a small statue of Venus, a pair of large binoculars, and a box of silver forks, knives, and spoons. Old Joshua acted rough and never wore anything but a sweatshirt and a pair of old trousers, Professor Carswell said. But I could see he was well educated, and he always used his silver when he ate. Yet in the 7 months he was here, all he did was sit out on the lawn in our canvas chair and sketch. At night he painted all the time. See?" The professor took a canvas covering off a pile in the corner, revealing 20 paintings. They were all pictures of the cottage and grounds. In some, the cottage was seen from very close up, while in others it was so far away that all you could see was the striped porch awning with its patches. "They're not bad," Uncle Titus said. His eyes gleamed as he looked around at the suitcases, the silver cutlery, and the paintings. There was nothing Uncle Titus enjoyed more than buying things to sell in his junkyard. His wife, Jupiter's Aunt Matilda, frequently complained about the outlandish items he found, but Uncle Titus was always convinced that a buyer would turn up. Usually he was right. "You're selling all of this?" asked Titus Jones. "Yes, the old man died owing me rent," Professor Carswell said. "He sometimes got money from Europe, so I wrote to that address, but I've had no answer. No one has come, and I need the money." While Uncle Titus and the professor discussed price, Jupiter looked at the meager possessions of Joshua Cameron with disappointment. There was nothing at all that looked really valuable. "What happened to Mr. Cameron, Hal?" he asked. "He just got sick," Hal Carswell said. "I tried to help him, but he was delirious with fever, babbled about canvases and zigzags. The doctor came and wanted to move him to a hospital, but Mr. Cameron died first. He was just old and sick." "Well," Pete said, "there sure isn't much in his stuff that a thief would want, Jupe. A mistake, I guess." Jupiter nodded glumly. They loaded Joshua Cameron's things onto the salvage yard truck and started home along the winding canyon road. As the truck passed the mouth of the barranca, Jupiter frowned. "Thieves don't usually pick a house by mistake," the stocky first investigator said thoughtfully. "I guess we'll never know for sure what that man wanted," Pete said. "I suppose not," Jupiter sighed. But both boys were wrong.